What's up everybody, this is Connor Flood and this is part 2 of my experiences going from 0 to 9 Ackie monitors. So the first thing I want to talk about in this video is last video. So last video I posted did pretty well. I gained 22 subscribers from it. It got, at this time, about 250 views in 3 weeks, which is a lot better than I expected, so I'm really happy with that. I shared it on Facebook and on Reddit, and I got a lot of feedback, and some of it was negative, some of it was positive, and the negative things were specifically talking about my cohabbing of the Ackie monitors in these 4x2x2 cages. So there are a lot of people that commented on Reddit and on my last video. Some were very helpful and very intelligent and reasonable about their arguments against cohabbing Ackies, while others just personally insulted me and clearly didn't want to get anywhere with any sort of conversation. So those weren't really that helpful, but the others were. So I want to discuss and voice my opinion on cohabbing 3 Ackies in a 4x2x2, or just cohabbing Ackies in general, and start a conversation, comments about cohabbing Ackies. As you can obviously tell, I am for cohabbing Ackies. So first I'm going to talk about the concerns of the people who are against cohabbing Ackies, and then give my rebuttals to them. Number 1, there is a risk cohabbing Ackies. What can happen is they can fight and hurt each other. Some people say this will happen, some people say it might happen, some people say it won't happen. And I err on the side of might. The people against cohabbing Ackies also say it's not beneficial for them, so it's just a risk that you're taking that is unnecessary, which I actually somewhat agree with and can be true in some scenarios, but not in every scenario, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So I'm going to start off with my rebuttals by saying I've gotten most of my cohabbing information from Brandon at Rare Earth Inc., and also different sources on the internet. So first let's talk about the risk involved with cohabbing Ackie monitors. So yes, there is a risk, and no, it is not necessary to take that risk in every scenario. But my goal with these Ackies is to breed them. And there is risk involved with breeding any animal, and Ackies are no exception. So there are 2 different ways you could do it. You could have 2 different cages with a male and a female in them, and then introduce them at different times and hopefully have them breed. Or you could take the route that I'm going. So in this setup, they're together all the time from the time they're a baby to the time they're adults and ready to breed, while in the other setup, they are separated until the time comes to breed. And one thing I've noticed consistently with all the stories I've heard of Ackie monitors getting seriously injured because of cohabbing tend to be when 2 already established adults are introduced to each other. So from my limited experience but observations, I would argue that maybe breeding is more risky if you are introducing 2 already well-established adults together in order to breed, rather than racing them up together and cohabbing them and having them breed when they get to the right age, whenever they want to. So the risk is there either way, but I feel like the risk actually might be greater if you keep them separately rather than cohabbing them from a baby. Now the flip side of that is, if you're not trying to breed and you want to cohab, that may not be an ideal situation, because 1, if you have 2 Ackies together, they might be a male and female and they're going to breed, and also there's a risk there, and if you don't want them breeding anyway, then why should you take that risk if they're just pets? I would also agree with them to say that cohabbing is not necessarily beneficial to Ackies, because from my research it doesn't really seem to make any sort of difference whether they're cohabbed or not. They don't seem to get depressed if they don't have another Ackie. Another concern that people against keeping Ackies together have is that if they're not fighting, then it might still be causing them stress just because they're around other Ackie monitors and they feel like it's a hostile environment. And what I have to say to that is, yes, sometimes that can be true, but it seems to get better with time. What I've noticed is in the first 2 to 3 weeks, mainly probably the most in the first week, and it still carried on into the next 2 weeks, the Ackies had a lot of skirmishes, which are like quick little fights, and they'd also try to mount each other and stuff like that to assert dominance. And basically what they were doing is they were in a new environment and they were trying to figure out hierarchy. And when I first got them and I was seeing these fights, I was a little bit concerned, and I messaged Brandon, and he pretty much told me that little skirmishes are normal, that's to be expected, but you do have to watch because sometimes they can get too violent and actually lead to Ackies getting hurt, but most of the time they're okay, and it's just something that they do. And a great way he explained it is when biting turns to bite, that's when it becomes a problem. And that makes a lot of sense when you watch Ackie monitors fight. A lot of times when they fight, they kind of nibble at each other, but they don't really bite and hold on for very long. Now in the bottom cage, when I first got them, I did end up having to move one up to the middle cage because that one was getting bit. It wasn't biting, it was bite and like hold on to the arm and not let go, and constant harassment, and it didn't seem to be very enthusiastic about eating. It was hiding a lot. So at that point, what I did was I took one of the more dominant ones out of the middle cage, put it down in the bottom cage, and then took the one from the bottom cage that was struggling and put it in the middle cage, and that solved the problem. And like I said, after about 3 weeks, the skirmishes really slowed down, and I don't really see them very often anymore. They still do happen occasionally, but overall it's certainly not as frequent as when I first got them. I think that will continue getting better with time, and the stress level will go down, and as long as they're eating and active, then they should be doing just fine. So yeah, let me know what you think on that whole subject down in the comments. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Just keep it civil. No need to personally insult me or anybody else. That'll never get anybody anywhere. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments. Okay, so now let's talk cage size. So as I said in my last video, I keep 3 Ackies to a 4x2x2 cage. So the first question is, can a 4x2x2 work for 3 Ackies? And I can pretty confidently answer that question, yes. There's plenty of people who've told me how they've kept 3, sometimes even 4 Ackies in a 40-gallon sized tank. Not to say that's necessarily an ideal setup, but it does work. And also when I asked Brandon what would be the minimum size cage I could keep 3 Ackies in, he told me 4x2x2. So again, as I said in the last video, I'm going for a minimal setup because this is in my room. The goal is to minimize the amount of space they're taking up while still providing adequate care for them. That results in them breeding and being overall happy lizards. So I can confidently say, assuming that your Ackies get along well enough, you can keep 3 Ackies successfully in a 4x2x2 cage. Now the real question that I don't have the answer to, and I don't think anybody really has the answer to, is should you? So to explore this question, we have to think about, 1, Ackies are not humans. So one thing that us humans tend to do is we tend to assume animals think the way we do. So when we see an Ackie in a small cage versus an Ackie in a huge cage, we think the Ackie in the huge cage is happier because if we were that Ackie, we would be happier. But how do you know if that Akkie's happier? I mean, assuming they're both eating, they're both shedding correctly, they're both breeding, these are all signs of a healthy, happy animal. What would be the difference between the Ackie in the small cage compared to the Ackie in the big cage? Could it be more exercise? Maybe there's more enrichment in a bigger cage. But does enrichment lead to a happier animal? Maybe, maybe not. But how do you measure the happiness of an animal? And back to the more exercise thing, I've never kept an Ackie in a big cage and kept an Ackie in a small cage and compared their activity levels. And even if you did do that, their activity levels could vary just based on their individual personalities. Say if you were able to clone one Ackie and you fed it the exact same thing, treated it the exact same way, did everything the same, and the only difference was the enclosure size. Would the one in the bigger enclosure be more active, more healthy, and overall a happier animal than the one in the smaller cage? Again, that's a question I can't answer. So let me know what you think. What are some ways that you can measure the happiness of an animal that would prove it being in a bigger cage leads to a better life? Let me know down in the comments. So one thing you might notice is I'm not holding any Ackies. The reason being is they're settled in, so now I'm working on taming them. So right now the approach I'm taking is just completely leaving them alone, and the only interaction they have with me is interaction they choose to have with me. Pretty much what I do is I put my hand in there, and sometimes they investigate it, sometimes they crawl on it, sometimes they bite my finger because they think it's food. And I've definitely seen some improvements over the last month as I've been spending about an hour a day or so working on the Ackies and their tameness. One thing that I've continuously noticed and reinforces what I said in the last video is they all have their very own personalities. Some Ackies are taking to taming better than others. Some won't even let me get my hand close to them, while others I put my hand in there and they'll crawl all the way up onto my shoulder. Well, most of them tend to be in between where they don't seem to mind me, but they also don't seem to be all that interested in climbing on my hand. They may smell it, they may bite it. They seem to still not want to have anything to do with my hand if it's not food. Speaking of food, that was something I didn't even talk about in my last video because I completely forgot. Right now their diet is half superworms, half crickets, and the occasional scrambled eggs. I really don't like crickets, so the crickets will only be part of their diet until I'm able to build up my dubia roach colony to the right size to where they can feed the Ackies. But for now, my dubia colony is not producing enough babies to feed 9 Ackie monitors, so to keep costs down, I'm just doing crickets and superworms. What ideally I want their diet to be later down the road is half dubia roaches, part superworms, and maybe one day a week do some chopped pinkies or something like that. But for now, I'm feeding them superworms and crickets, and they all seem to like it. So that's about it for this month with the 9 Ackies. It hasn't been super eventful, which I can say is probably a good thing. Everything's been consistently going well, and I'm happy about that right now. I also plan on uploading other things on this channel other than Ackie Monitor stuff, even though I said I would only upload Ackie Monitor stuff in the last video, and by the time you're watching this, a ball python video has already gone up. So if you're into ball pythons, go check that out. And I also want to do tours of collections and expos in the future, maybe other care guides. I'm not going to make any sort of care-related content or really, I guess, educational content about Ackies because I don't feel like I have enough experience to be telling people what to do with their Ackies. So yeah, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and I'll see you in the next video.